It's perhaps a good idea to watch lesson 8, the previous lesson to this one, so that you understand the notion of object, the grammatical object, and pronouns before you dive into indirect object pronouns. First, a little reminder. If we take this sentence, she eats an apple, we saw in the previous lesson that she is the subject, eats is the verb, and an apple is what's left, is the direct object, which answers to the question what, she eats what, an apple is the direct object of the verb. Now if we take another sentence, she speaks to her sister, we still have she as the subject, speaks as the verb. We've got her sister, which is an object, but this time the root between the verb and the object is not direct. It is interrupted. There is a preposition, the preposition to, between the verb and the object. Therefore, the transition is indirect. And that's why we say that the object is an indirect object. So in our last lesson, we saw that direct object pronouns replace direct objects. Therefore, indirect object pronouns replace indirect objects. You notice that in the English translation, instead of me, which would be the direct object pronoun, we have to me with the addition of the preposition. Now, let's pronounce these pronouns. We've got me, te, lui, nous, vous, leur. Just note that we have the rule of elision for me and te, which means that they will lose the e in front of a vowel or an h. So we'll end up with m apostrophe or t apostrophe. If you already know direct pronouns, it's quite easy to remember indirect object pronouns. You just need to identify the differences. So if we look at the first difference, we have le and la as direct pronouns and lui, which encompasses feminine and masculine, to him, to her. The other one that's different is les and leur. The others stay the same. Before we move to the position of the pronoun, I want to explain a grammatical term that you might find useful because it makes things simpler. So, a verb that requires a direct object is called direct transitive. In lesson 8, we saw about direct object pronouns and direct objects, and all we had was a verb followed with an object without a preposition. That's what we call direct transitive verb. No preposition. Therefore, a verb that requires an indirect object is called indirect transitive. It means there's a little preposition after. And in French, that preposition is a with an accent. That's why we have in our example, je téléphone à mon patron. In English, you would say, I call my boss, I telephone my boss. No preposition in English, so be careful with the translations. The indirect object is mon patron. Mon patron is a masculine word, therefore the pronoun is going to be lui. So we end up with je téléphone à lui. Let's have a look at the position now. We end up with je lui téléphone, with lui before the verb, because as for direct object pronouns, indirect object pronouns go before the conjugated verb. When we have negatives, je ne parle pas à Simon means I do not speak to Simon. There again, the pronoun will go before the conjugated verb. Je ne lui parle pas. I do not speak to him. In sentences containing an infinitive, je déteste demander à mes parents. I hate to ask my parents. Je veux demander à mes parents. I want to ask my parents. Je vais demander à mes parents. I'm going to ask my parents. The pronoun goes before the infinitive verb. So we end up with je déteste leur demander. I hate asking them. Je veux leur demander. I want to ask them. Je vais leur demander. I'm going to ask them. Let's practice together and try to replace the indirect object using the correct pronoun. For example, if I say je parle à ma mère, the sentence with the pronoun will be je lui parle. So I speak to my mother, I speak to her. In this example, I write to my parents, j'écris à mes parents. The indirect object is my parents, mes parents. It's a plural word, they, so the correct pronoun is leur, so I get rid of the indirect object and put the pronoun in the correct position, which is before the verb, and we end up with je leur écris, I write to them. In this example, we have a verb in the perfect tense, à donner, à being the auxiliary and donner the past participle. We have our indirect object. It doesn't change, it's nous. Tu nous as donné la clé. You gave us the key. Now note that with verbs in the perfect tense, the pronoun goes before the auxiliary verb. And of course the translation, you gave us the key. Last example, je veux faire un cadeau à Tom. We have the infinitive in pink, faire. Tom is our indirect object. It's the third person, he. Therefore, I can replace it with lui. And the final version is going to be je veux lui faire un cadeau with the pronoun before the infinitive verb, and the translation, although it's a bit awkward in English, I want to make a gift to him. Let's have a look at useful indirect transitive verbs. This is a short list. There are plenty more. Always remember the little preposition à. So let's have a look. Demander à. Nous lui demandons. Dire à. Ils te disent. Donner à. Vous me donnez. Écrire à. Je leur écrirai. Envoyer à. Nous leur envoyons un texto. Offrir à. Tu lui offres un cadeau. Parler à. Nous ne leur parlons pas. Prêter à. Tu me prêtes ton stylo. Raconter à. Il m'a raconté. Répondre à. Il vous répond. Téléphoner à. Ils vont nous téléphoner. Now for a little practice exercise. On the left, you have sentences containing an indirect object. Your task is to change the sentences using an indirect object pronoun. You may want to pause the video and write down your answers, or you may want to do the activity with me as I go along. C'est parti! He lends his car to us. We have à nous as an indirect object. Therefore, in the sentence with the pronoun, we're going to have il nous prête sa voiture. Vous avez envoyé une lettre à moi et Tom. To me and Tom. To us. Vous nous avez envoyé une lettre. With nous before the auxiliary verb, because this is a sentence in the perfect tense. Il n'a pas donné de reçu. Now, we've got a negative, and we've got the perfect tense. Not really more difficult, because we've got to focus on the pronoun before the auxiliary. Il ne lui a pas donné de reçu. Je dois demander à ma mère. Je dois lui demander. The pronoun is before the infinitive. Tu vas répondre à Luc et Tom. Tu them. Tu vas leur répondre. Again, the pronoun is before the infinitive. Je dirai la vérité. This is the future tense. Je vous dirai la vérité, with the pronoun before the conjugated verb. So it doesn't matter which tense it is. If it's conjugated, the pronoun goes before it. Vous racontez des histoires. À moi, to me. Vous me racontez des histoires. When using both pronouns together in the same sentence, or several pronouns, there is a rule of thumb regarding the order of the pronouns. Here it is. Me, te, nous, vous before le, la, les, l'apostrophe, before lui and leur. However, do not be surprised if you hear something different when listening to French people, because we might not always follow this particular order. But here is the rule, and here are some examples. Je la lui donne. Nous le leur envoyons. Je me les offre. Vous la leur offrez. Je vous l'envoie. Félicitations, you've completed lesson 9. I'll leave you with a little follow-up task. And all I have to say is au revoir et à bientôt for lesson number 10.